A billionaire stepped out of his luxury car and saw a homeless boy helping his paralyzed daughter, not asking for money, not seeking attention, but kneeling in the dust with a care so intimate it looked like something he had done 100 times before. The man was Richard Cole. Powerful enough to buy hospitals, feared enough to bend markets, but completely helpless when it came to the girl in the wheelchair behind him, his paralyzed daughter, Emily, whose life had been frozen since a single accident stole her legs and quietly stole his peace. The homeless boy was called Noah. Ragged clothes, empty pockets, nowhere to sleep tonight, but his hands moved with precision as he adjusted Emily's blanket, aligned her posture, and whispered words that made her do something she hadn't done in months. She smiled, not out of politeness, not out of gratitude, but like someone who felt seen. The billionaire noticed what everyone else missed. The boy never looked at her legs, never rushed, never begged, but he spoke like someone who understood paralysis, pain, and time running out. Then Emily held the boy's sleeve and said softly, "Daddy, please don't send him away." That was the moment the billionaire realized this wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't kindness. This was history colliding with his daughter's life. And when he learned what the homeless boy knew, why his paralyzed daughter trusted him, and what he did next, it wouldn't just shock him. It would shock everyone. Who was this homeless boy really? Why did he know how to help a paralyzed child better than trained professionals? And what decision could a billionaire make that would change all of their lives forever? Richard Cole stood frozen beside the open car door, the polished leather of the seat behind him catching the sunlight like a mirror to his wealth. Everything about his life was designed to signal power: his tailored suit, the armored vehicle, the quiet efficiency of the driver who had already stepped out to scan the street. Richard owned ports, medical supply chains, entire city blocks. His name moved markets when it appeared in headlines, but none of that mattered now. Emily sat strapped into her wheelchair, the same way she had been every day for the last 8 years. Her body was still, but her fingers trembled slightly where they rested on the armrest, an involuntary reminder of nerves that no longer obeyed her. Richard had memorized every tremor, every tightening of her jaw, every breath that meant pain was coming. He had paid specialists across 3 continents to teach him those signs. What he had never learned was how to bring that smile back. Yet here it was pulled from her by a boy with dirt under his fingernails. "Emily," Richard said carefully, lowering his voice, "are you all right?" She nodded, eyes never leaving Noah. "He fixed it," she said. "Fixed what?" Richard asked. "The way the blanket folds here," she replied, tapping her knee. "If it presses too much, it hurts later." Richard's throat tightened. That detail wasn't in any brochure. It was learned through nights of trial, error, and tears. Noah began to pull his hand away, instinctively creating distance, the way people did when they expected to be chased off. But Emily held on. "It's okay," she told him. "You can stay for a minute." The boy hesitated, then nodded once. Up close, Richard noticed more things that didn't fit. The way Noah shifted his weight to stay within Emily's line of sight. The way his eyes flicked briefly to the traffic light, not out of impatience, but timing. The way he inhaled slowly, as if counting. Skills like that came from repetition. From responsibility to heavy for a child. "How do you know my daughter?" Richard asked. Noah looked up at him, calm but guarded. "I don't," he said. "I just help when I see how." Something in that answer unsettled Richard more than defiance would have. Behind Richard's eyes, a memory surfaced. Uninvited Emily at 9 years old, lying in a hospital bed far too big for her, asking in a whisper if she would ever feel her feet again. Richard had promised her the world that night. He had meant it. Now the world stood before him in torn shoes. Emily leaned closer to Noah and whispered something Richard couldn't hear. Whatever it was made the boy's lips curve into the smallest smile, the kind that vanished quickly as if he wasn't used to keeping it. "Daddy," Emily said again, firmer this time. "Please," Richard realized, with a jolt of fear and curiosity intertwined, that sending this boy away would cost him something he might never get back. And for the first time in years, the billionaire didn't know what the right decision was. Richard did not tell the driver to leave. That alone unsettled the man behind the wheel. In 5 years of service, Richard Cole had never lingered anywhere unplanned. Schedules ruled his life. Time bent around him. Yet now, seconds stretched as the billionaire studied the boy standing inches from his daughter's wheelchair. "Where are your parents?" Richard asked. Noah's eyes flickered not away, not down but inward, as if the question opened a door he usually kept locked. I don't have any, he said evenly. Emily stiffened. Richard noticed immediately. She always reacted to loss faster than anyone else, as if her own body had trained her to sense it before words arrived. Richard straightened. Then where do you stay? Noah shrugged. Places. The answer was vague, but not evasive. Richard had interrogated executives, politicians, men with far more to lose. This boy wasn't hiding something to protect himself, he was protecting something fragile. A breeze passed, sharper now. Noah adjusted the blanket again without thinking, his fingers folding fabric away from pressure points with muscle memory that didn't belong to a child his age. Richard's mind flashed backward to a sterile hospital room years ago, to a nurse correcting his clumsy attempt at tucking Emily in, to being told that comfort was a science, not instinct. Yet here this boy was, practicing it flawlessly. Emily tilted her head. You came back, she said softly. I said I would, Noah replied. That answer landed quietly but heavily. Promises mattered to him. Richard's gaze dropped to Noah's wrist. A thin, frayed cord circled it, once blue, now faded almost white. Too deliberate to be trash. Too worn to be decorative. Richard stored that detail away, unaware it would matter later. How do you know her name? Richard asked. She told me yesterday, Noah said, when her chair got stuck. Emily nodded. He lifted the footrest first, she added, almost proudly. Everyone else pulls the back. Richard felt something tighten in his chest. That was mistake number one, lifting from the wrong place. Noah hadn't made it. A memory surfaced without permission. Emily at 11, screaming as orderlies rushed her down a corridor after a seizure. Richard running behind them, helpless, useless, praying money could catch up fast enough. It never did. What do you want? Richard asked suddenly. Noah blinked, surprised. Nothing, sir. That answer, more than any other, convinced Richard this situation was dangerous. People always wanted something. Silence usually came with a price. A black SUV slowed nearby. One of Richard's security men subtly shifted position. Emily noticed. Daddy, she said quietly. Please don't scare him. Richard exhaled. He hadn't realized he was holding his breath. No one is scaring anyone, he said, though his eyes remained on Noah. You help my daughter. Why? Noah hesitated. Just long enough to signal wait. Because, he said finally, no one helped my sister fast enough. The words weren't dramatic. They didn't need to be. Emily's fingers curled tight around the armrest. Richard felt the ground tilt, not with sympathy, but recognition. He had stood in that same powerless space once. Different hallway. Same fear. How old was she? Emily asked. Noah swallowed. 8. Emily was 9 when it happened to her. The coincidence felt sharp, almost deliberate. A car horn blared somewhere down the street, snapping the moment. Noah stepped back instinctively, already retreating. I should go, he said. Emily panicked. Will you come back? Noah nodded once. If you're here. Richard watched the boy walk away, counting steps unconsciously, noting how he avoided cracks in the pavement, how he paused at the corner like someone used to watching for danger. And for the first time, Richard Cole considered something he had never allowed himself to consider before, that this homeless boy might be the most qualified person his daughter had ever met. Richard did not speak during the drive home. Emily noticed immediately. Silence from her father usually meant calculations were happening, numbers, risks, leverage. But this silence felt different. He wasn't weighing markets. He was replaying moments. The way Noah had folded the blanket, the way he had stepped back before being asked out, the way he said 8 like the number still hurt. Daddy, Emily said gently, breaking the quiet. You're thinking too loud. Richard gave a faint smile. Am I that obvious? To me, she replied. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was calmer than she'd been all week. Her shoulders were relaxed. Even her breathing was steadier. The doctors would have attributed it to medication timing, but Richard knew better. He had watched patterns for nearly a decade. Emotional comfort reduced physical pain. That was something no chart ever explained properly. He helped you yesterday too? Richard asked. Yes, Emily said. When my chair hit the curb, he told me not to panic first. Richard's grip tightened on the armrest beside him. That instruction came straight from trauma response training. Panic worsened muscle spasms. Someone had taught that boy well, or pain had. Did he say where he learned all this? Richard asked. Emily shook her head. But he listens. Most people talk at me. He talks to me. That distinction settled heavily between them. As the gates of their estate opened, the contrast felt almost obscene. Acres of manicured land. Security cameras embedded in stone pillars. A house big enough to echo even when full. Richard had bought safety, privacy, comfort, everything a child could need, except understanding. That night, after Emily was settled, Richard stood alone in his study. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline he had conquered piece by piece. On his desk lay reports from neurologists in Switzerland, Germany, Japan. He had funded experimental trials that never made the news. Failure was simply filed away quietly when you could afford silence. His phone buzzed. Security. Double quote, sir. The voice said. We ran a quick sweep like you asked. The boy's name is Noah. No school records past age 10. No foster placement. He's been flagged near hospitals twice over the last 3 years. Never caused trouble. Never begged. Richard closed his eyes. Hospitals. That detail clicked into place with a memory he hadn't touched in years. Emily asleep after surgery. Richard pacing corridors at 3 a.m., watching other families break quietly in plastic chairs. He remembered a small boy once, curled up near a vending machine, holding a girl's hand while monitors beeped behind them. At the time, Richard had been too consumed by his own fear to ask questions. Had that been Noah? Find out where he sleeps, Richard said. Pause. Sir. Discreetly, Richard added. No police. No social services. Another pause, longer this time. Understood. Richard hung up and stared at the city again. Across town, Noah lay awake on cardboard beneath an overpass, staring at concrete streaked with old water stains. He rolled the blue cord on his wrist between his fingers, the fibers nearly worn through. A habit from nights when sleep refused to come. He thought of Emily's smile. He thought of her father's eyes, sharp, searching, dangerous in a way he recognized. Men like that didn't forget details. They didn't let loose ends exist. Noah pulled his jacket tighter, already sensing that something had shifted, and far above him, and a house built to withstand storms. Richard Cole made a decision that would test not only Noah but himself. The park was quieter the next afternoon. Not empty but muted, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Richard had chosen the time deliberately. School hours, fewer onlookers, fewer variables. He had ordered the driver to park farther away and instructed security to remain invisible. If Noah returned, Richard wanted to see who he was when no one was watching. Emily noticed the change immediately. Why are we stopping here again? She asked, though her eyes were already searching the pathways. No reason, Richard said lightly. Just some air. She didn't argue, but her fingers tightened around the armrest. Hope, Richard realized, made people anxious before it made them happy. Minutes passed. Richard watched everything: the shadows of trees, the rhythm of joggers, the way Emily shifted slightly when her lower back began to ache. He waited for the familiar disappointment to settle in. It always did. Then Emily whispered, "He's here." Noah didn't approach right away. He stood across the path, half hidden by a food cart, observing. Richard recognized the behavior instantly. It was the same skin his security team performed before entering any space. Identify exits. Identify threats. Decide whether it was safe to proceed. That decision alone answered a question Richard hadn't asked aloud. Noah finally stepped forward. "You came," Emily said, relief flooding her voice. "I said I would," Noah replied. The same steady tone as before. Richard said nothing. He wanted to see if the boy would break the silence first. Instead, Noah crouched beside Emily's chair and pointed gently. "Your footrest is too high today." "Did they change it?" Emily frowned. "The nurse adjusted it this morning. That angle will pull on your hip later," Noah said quietly. He glanced up, not at Richard, but at Emily's face. "Is it okay if I fix it?" She nodded immediately. Richard watched closely as Noah loosened the mechanism, adjusted it by millimeters, then tested it twice. He didn't rush. He didn't look around for approval. He worked like someone who had learned the cost of getting it wrong. "How do you know that?" Richard asked, unable to stop himself. Noah didn't flinch. "Trial and error," he said. The words triggered a sharp flash in Richard's mind. Emily screaming during early physical therapy sessions, begging him to make it stop, while doctors insisted pain meant progress. He remembered walking out of that room and throwing up in the hallway because he couldn't watch his daughter suffer for knowledge. Noah finished adjusting and leaned back slightly. Better? Emily shifted. Her shoulders dropped. Yeah, she said. A lot. Richard exhaled slowly. You've been around medical equipment, Richard said. Not a question. Noah hesitated this time. A deeper pause. I have your one. My sister, he said again. Then, softer, she hated when people rushed. That was all he offered. Richard nodded, filing it away. Step for logic applied enough explanation to ground the skill, not enough to dilute the mystery. Do you go to school? Richard asked. Noah shook his head. Not anymore. Why? Noah looked at Emily before answering. Some lessons don't fit in classrooms. Emily smiled faintly, but Richard felt a chill. Children who spoke like that had been forced to grow up fast and something had pushed them there. A woman nearby stared too long. Noah noticed instantly. I should go, he said, already rising. Emily's voice caught. Will you come back tomorrow? Noah looked at Richard for the first time since arriving. Their eyes locked. If it's safe, Noah said carefully. Richard understood the meaning beneath the words. Safety wasn't about traffic. It will be, Richard said. Noah nodded once, then walked away, disappearing into the crowd with practiced ease. Richard stayed behind, staring at the empty path. He had tested the boy, and the boy had passed without knowing there was a test, which meant the real test was still coming. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Pain usually woke her around midnight, a dull ache that crept upward from places she couldn't feel but somehow always knew were there. Tonight, though, it wasn't pain that kept her awake. It was memory, fresh, bright, and settling in its warmth. She kept seeing Noah's hands, careful, certain, never pitying. At 1:17 a.m. She pressed the call button. Richard appeared within minutes, hair undone, phone still in his hand. He had been awake too. He always was. Bad night? He asked quietly. Emily shook her head. Different night. He sat beside her bed, the way he used to when she was small, before machines and schedules took over. For a moment, neither spoke. Daddy, she said finally, why does everyone look sad when they help me? Richard stiffened. The question cut deeper than accusation ever could. They don't mean to, he said carefully. But he doesn't, she insisted. No, it doesn't. Richard looked at his daughter, at the sharp intelligence in her eyes, inherited from him, sharpened by loss. He thought of the way Noah had waited for permission, the way he spoke in facts instead of reassurances. He's seen worse, Richard said quietly. Emily studied him. You're going to scare him away. The words weren't angry. They were afraid. Richard closed his eyes briefly. He saw another flash. Emily at 10, overhearing doctors whisper prognosis percentages, realizing adults were lying to her with smiles. Trust, once broken, never return whole. I won't, he said. I promise. Promises again. Across the city, Noah sat on the steps behind a closed clinic. He's drawn to his chest. The building smelled faintly of antiseptic even from the outside. He came here when memories pressed too close. Places remembered him, even when people didn't. His sister Lily had liked this clinic. Said it felt clean, safe. He could still see her in flashes too thin, eyes too big, laughing anyway. He remembered learning to silence alarms before nurses arrived, memorizing the order of pain meds because mistakes meant screams. He remembered doctors explaining things to adults who never came back. By 12. He could read charts better than most interns. By 13. Lily was gone. Noah pressed his forehead against his knees, the blue cord biting lightly into his wrist. He hadn't meant to get attached to Emily. Attachment was dangerous. Attachment made loss louder. But when he'd seen her smile, something old had stirred, something he thought had died with his sister. A car slowed nearby. Noah tensed instantly. It didn't stop. Across town, Richard stood in his private medical wing, staring at a wall of data no one else had access to. He had ordered a full audit, every therapy Emily had ever undergone, every adjustment that helped for her. Patterns emerged that specialists had missed because they weren't living with her pain, and threading through it all was a realization that unsettled him deeply. Noah's instincts aligned with the data, which meant this wasn't coincidence. It was competence. Richard picked up his phone. Prepare a room, he told his chief of staff. Not a guest room. There was a pause. For whom, sir? Richard hesitated just long enough to acknowledge the weight of what he was about to do. "For a boy who doesn't trust men like me," he said. He ended the call, already aware that when Noah learned what he intended, the boy might refuse, and that refusal would change everything. Morning came quietly, the way it did in places built to hide wealth. Sunlight filtered through tall windows onto marble floors that never felt cold, no matter the season. Emily sat near the window, watching gardeners move in precise lines across the lawn. Everything in her world was orderly, predictable, controlled, yet her mind wasn't. "Daddy," she said without turning, "are you trying to replace him?" Richard paused at the doorway. He had learned long ago that pretending not to hear difficult questions only delayed them. "Replace who?" he asked. "You know who." Richard walked in and leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. He studied his daughter's reflection in the glass, older now, sharper, carrying herself like someone who had learned to observe before trusting. "I'm trying to protect you," he said. Emily gave a small, humorless smile. "That's what people say before they take things away." The words struck deeper than she knew. Richard remembered another morning, years earlier, standing in a hospital corridor while a doctor explained spinal damage using words like irreversible and unlikely. He had nodded, thanked the man, and walked into Emily's room to promise her a future the doctor didn't believe in. Protection had always been his excuse. "I won't force him," Richard said carefully. "Whatever happens next will be his choice." Emily turned then. "You promise?" "Yes." Across the city, Noah was already awake. He sat on the edge of a church courtyard, eating bread given without questions. His eyes kept drifting to the street. He didn't know why. He just knew something was coming. Life had trained him that change never announced itself kindly. A black car passed slowly, didn't stop, still. Noah's body tensed. He remembered the first time officials had come for Lily, saying they could help, saying systems existed for children like them. He remembered how help always came with rules, and rules always came with separation. He stood, slinging his worn backpack over his shoulder, ready to move. "Hey," a voice called gently. Noah turned. It wasn't security, not police. It was a woman in plain clothes, holding out a bottle of water like an offering, not a command. "Mr. Cole would like to speak with you," she said. "You don't have to say yes." Noah laughed quietly. "Men like that don't ask." "He did," she replied. Noah hesitated. He thought of Emily's smile again, thought of the way she trusted him without needing to know his story, thought of how easily that trust could be broken. "Where?" he asked. She named the place. Noah stiffened. Clinics meant paperwork. Paperwork meant records. Records meant cages. "I'll listen," he said finally. "That's all." At the estate, Richard waited in a smaller room, not his office. No desk, no power symbols. He had chosen the space deliberately, stripping away everything that screamed authority. When Noah walked in, he stopped short. "Emily was there." "You said choice," Noah said immediately, suspicion flaring. "I did," Richard replied. "This is mine." Emily rolled forward slightly. "You can leave if you want," she said. "I won't be angry." Noah searched her face for deception and found none. Richard took a slow breath. "I want to offer you safety," he said. "Food, place to sleep, education if you want it." "And in return?" Noah asked. "Nothing," Richard said, then corrected himself. "Honesty." Noah's jaw tightened. "That's the most expensive word you could ask for," he said. Richard nodded. "I know." The silence that followed was heavy, balanced on a decision that would tilt all their lives. Noah looked at Emily, then at the door, then back again, and for the first time since his sister died, he considered staying somewhere long enough to be seen. The Institute didn't look like a place meant to change lives. That was intentional. Richard had insisted on it. No banners, no press, no glass walls announcing charity. From the outside, it resembled a quiet research facility tucked behind old trees, the kind of place people drove past without curiosity. Inside, everything was precise: wide corridors, adaptive equipment, observation rooms hidden behind tinted panels. A place built for watching patterns, not people. Emily rolled in first, her expression unreadable. "Why are we here?" she asked. Richard walked beside her, hands clasped behind his back. "Because I want to see something." "What?" "Whether care can be taught," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Or only earned." Emily frowned. That sounds like a test. Richard didn't deny it. Across the hall, Noah stood rigid, 1 foot already angled toward the exit. He had been brought there under the promise of food and warmth, nothing else. The moment he sensed structure, rules, observation, his body rebelled. This was how places started. This was how control crept in. A woman in scrubs approached him gently. "You can sit if you'd like." "I'm fine," Noah replied, voice neutral. Richard watched from behind the glass, noting the tension in the boy's shoulders, the way his eyes tracked movement. Trauma response, hypervigilance. He had seen it in veterans. In survivors. "Bring her in," Richard said quietly. The door opened, and Emily rolled into the room. Noah's breath caught. "You didn't say she'd be here," he said. The first edge in his voice Richard had heard. Emily tilted her head. "You look like you're about to run." Noah hesitated. "Places like this, they don't let you leave easily." Richard stepped forward. "Neither do streets," he said evenly. The two locked eyes. This time, Noah didn't look away. "You brought me here to see if I'd fail," Noah said. Richard paused, then nodded once. "Yes." Emily's eyes widened. "Daddy, I also brought you here to see if you'd refuse," Richard continued. "Because refusal would tell me just as much." Silence filled the room. Noah's fingers curled unconsciously, brushing the blue cord on his wrist. Richard noticed. So did Emily. "You don't have to help," Emily said softly. "I just wanted you to see it." Noah looked around at the equipment, the white spaces, the chairs designed to support bodies that didn't cooperate. For a split second, the room blurred into another hallway, another time. Lily's hand slipping from his. A nurse apologizing too late. "I won't be watched," Noah said. "You won't be," Richard replied. "You'll be listened to," Noah scoffed. "Men like you don't listen." Richard didn't argue. He simply gestured toward Emily's chair. "Then tell me what's wrong with the way she's sitting." Noah stopped. He hadn't looked yet. Slowly, carefully, he approached Emily, not the equipment. He crouched, adjusted the angle of her hips by inches, slid a support where pressure would build in an hour. Then he stepped back. "She'll spasm tonight if you don't fix that," he said. Richard felt the floor shift beneath his certainty, because the sensors hidden, expensive, precise were already confirming Noah was right. And for the first time, Richard realized this wasn't about helping his daughter anymore. It was about admitting he had been wrong for years. Then a faint sound from outside, a car horn, a distant shout, made Noah freeze. He looked toward the window, instincts kicking in. Richard watched him, knowing that the boy's decision to stay, even for this moment, was heavier than anything he had ever asked of anyone, and he knew the next choice Noah made would change everything. The next morning, Emily woke to the sound of soft footsteps on polished floors. She wasn't alone. Noah sat at the edge of her bed, careful not to touch her blanket. His eyes scanned the room, cataloging everything: the position of the wheelchair, the small stack of therapy books on her nightstand, the tilt of her pillow. Even without words, he assessed risk, comfort, and precision. "Good morning," Emily whispered. Noah nodded. "Morning." Richard appeared in the doorway and announced. His expression was unreadable. "Billionaire, father, man used to controlling everything, yet clearly aware of the fragile dynamics in this room. You're here," Emily said. A quiet mix of surprise and relief. Noah didn't answer. He never wasted words on the obvious. Richard stepped closer. "I thought it would be better if we start the day together," he said evenly. "Breakfast, and then observation." Noah's jaw tightened. Observation, a word that had once meant interrogations, cages, separation. He had seen that path before. But Emily's glance softened him. Trust tethered to hope, a dangerous mix he hadn't felt since Lily. "Observation?" Emily asked. Eyebrows furrowed. Richard gave a faint smile. "I mean learning from each other." Noah's eyes flickered toward him, skeptical. The offer felt genuine, yet danger always came disguised as kindness. Breakfast was quiet. Emily ate slowly, occasionally glancing at Noah. Richard noted how her hands rested on the table, how she flexed her fingers to relieve tension. The sensors he had installed around this state recorded minute muscle movements, tracking patterns he had learned to interpret better than most doctors. Noah noticed them too. A faint smirk crossed his face, the first since arriving. He recognized tools, systems, structure. They had once been a cage. Now, they were potential allies. "You always watch people like this?" he asked Richard quietly. Always, Richard admitted. I've learned it's the only way to keep them safe. Especially her. Noah looked down. I used to watch my sister like that. Every second. Every movement. One mistake. And he swallowed. I lost her. Emily's hands tightened around her glass. She knew what loss felt like, though differently. Paralysis had stolen part of her mobility, yet Noah's loss carried a weight that went deeper. Richard noticed it too to children, both survivors, separated by fate, now in the same room. Richard leaned forward. Noah, I don't know what your life has been like, but I can promise you one thing here, you won't lose anyone like that again. Noah's eyes met Emily's, then Richard's. Silence stretched. Decision hung in there like a storm. Finally, Noah spoke. And if I stay, I do it my way. Richard nodded slowly. Agreed. As long as she's safe. Emily smiled faintly. Then you're staying. Noah exhaled, a long, cautious release. The tension in his body eased slightly, but the moment wasn't fully won, because the world outside this state didn't pause. The city was unaware that a homeless boy had chosen trust, that a billionaire had chosen humility, and that a paralyzed child had chosen hope. And somewhere across town, a figure in a dark car watched. Notes were being taken, questions recorded, and known to all three. The first real test of Noah's commitment and his trust was already approaching. Noah tightened his jacket around his wrist, glancing at the cord frayed by years of wear. A memory of Lily's last night flickered through his mind, sharp and painful. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The storm was coming. Night had fallen, but the estate was alive with quiet energy. Lamps glowed like sentinels along the manicured paths. Richard paced the library, the soft scratch of his shoes against marble echoing through the room. Emily slept upstairs, finally at peace, and Noah sat nearby, poring over a therapy guide. Richard had insisted he review his first official assignment. Why do you care so much? Noah asked suddenly, voice low, almost defensive. Richard didn't look up from the book. About what? About her. About me. About whether I stay or leave. Richard closed the book slowly and fixed him with a steady gaze. Because I've learned the hard way what it means to lose someone you can't protect. And I won't let that happen again. Not to her, not to you. Noah studied him. The billionaire's words were heavy with truth and experience, but Noah's skepticism had been honed by years of survival. And if I fail? Richard's face softened. Then you tried. That's all anyone can ask. Even me. Noah paused, the tension in his body coiling like a spring. He remembered Lily's last night vividly, the smell of the rain-slicked streets, her small hand slipping from his grasp, his frantic screams ignored. That night had forged him, hardened him, but it also had taught him to observe, adapt, and protect. Richard's voice cut through his thoughts. Emily trusts you. That's rare. Do you understand what that means? Noah swallowed. It means I can't screw it up. Exactly, Richard said. And that's why you need guidance. Noah's eyes flicked toward the doorway, shadows of a past life pressing in. He had never had guidance, only roles, pain, and absence. The thought of submitting, even slightly, was uncomfortable. Yet something in Richard's presence felt different. You're testing me, Noah said quietly, almost to himself. Richard shook his head. I'm offering you a choice. That's different. A soft creak in the hall made them both glance toward the stairs. Emily stirred, murmuring something in her sleep. Richard's gaze softened as he watched her tiny form shift beneath the blankets. Her trust wasn't blind. It was earned slowly, painfully. And Noah had been the first to earn it without being asked. Noah tightened his hands around the therapy guide, the blue cord on his wrist catching the lamplight. He thought of Lily, the nights he had stayed awake guarding her, the weight of responsibility pressing on him. He hadn't known then that he would meet someone like Emily, someone so fragile yet so capable of giving trust without question. A knock at the door shattered the fragile calm. Both men turned. Who is it? Richard asked. No answer. Just a silence that pressed against them. Richard moved toward the door cautiously, signaling Noah to stay. As he opened it, the corridor was empty. Just a folded envelope lying on the floor. No footprints, no note, nothing, just the envelope. Richard picked it up. A chill ran down his spine. The envelope was heavy, and the handwriting was unfamiliar. Noah leaned forward, instincts sharpening. It's a test, he said, almost in a whisper. Or a threat. Richard opened it slowly. Inside was a single photograph, Emily, asleep in her chair, at her most vulnerable. Written in red across the corner were the words, "Not all who watch are friendly." Noah's eyes narrowed. Memories of hidden threats, of unseen dangers from his past, surged forward. Richard swallowed. He had expected challenges, obstacles, resistance, but never direct intimidation so soon. Emily murmured again from upstairs. Unaware of the shadow that had just crossed their world. Noah stood, tense, ready to protect. Richard realized that trust had been given, but loyalty had not yet been tested. And outside the safety of the state, the storm that had been promised in whispers and shadows had finally arrived. The night stretched thick over the estate, shadows pooling in every corner. Noah crouched beside Emily's chair, muscles taut, senses alert. The photograph had been a warning, and instinct told him this was no idle threat. Richard moved silently behind him, an unspoken agreement passing between them. Emily's safety came first. Footsteps approached from the main hall, deliberate, heavy, unfamiliar. Noah's hand went to the small pocket inside his jacket where he kept a worn pendant, a relic from his sister Lily. Memories surged the hospital hallway, the vending machine where she had held his hand, the sound of her voice telling him to be brave. He had been brave before. He could be brave again. The figure appeared. A man, mid-30s, dressed in black, carrying a tablet. He stopped a few feet from Noah, eyes scanning the room, lingering on Emily. "Who are you?" Richard demanded. The man's lips curved slightly. "A friend. Of sorts." Noah's heart raced. He had been trained for confrontation, yet the subtle threat unnerved him. Richard's voice was calm but firm. "We don't welcome threats in this house. Speak plainly, or leave." The man hesitated. Then, with deliberate care, he set the tablet on the floor. On it flashed a live feed of Emily's therapy sessions from earlier months recorded without consent. Red numbers scrolled across the corner, marking dates and times. Noah's fists clenched. His gaze flicked to Richard. Richard's jaw tightened. He had expected challenges, yes, but surveillance of his daughter pushed an entirely new boundary. Yet instead of anger, a strategy formed. "Why show us this?" Richard asked evenly. The man's eyes met his. "To prove that even the most controlled environments have vulnerabilities. Even the most cautious father can be outmaneuvered." Noah's mind raced. Threats in the past had forced him to act alone. Here, he had allies. He had Emily. He had Richard. But trust wasn't built overnight. It was tested in moments like this. Emily stirred, sensing tension. "What's happening?" Noah leaned closer. "Stay calm. Nothing's going to hurt you." Richard stepped forward. "You came here for intimidation. That ends now. You leave or you face consequences." The man smirked. Consequences? Before he could react further, Noah moved with precise timing. Years of street-honed instincts and split-second decisions guided him. In a single, fluid motion, he pushed the man backward into the doorway. The tablet clattered to the floor, screen shattering. Richard's security, previously hidden, surged into the hallway. The man was restrained within seconds. Noah exhaled, muscles trembling. "Emily, wide-eyed, whispered, You saved me." Noah knelt beside her chair. "I promised. Remember?" Richard's eyes softened as he watched the boy, the homeless boy he had once observed from afar, act decisively, courageously, without hesitation. The weight of his past, the tragedy of his sister, and the life he had been forced to endure had forged something extraordinary. Richard finally spoke, voice quiet but filled with conviction. "Noah, you've not only helped Emily, you've helped me see what I was missing. Heart, instinct, trust. All the wealth in the world couldn't teach that." Noah looked at him, surprised. You mean it?" Richard nodded. "I do. You earned your place here not because of skill, but because of who you are." Emily reached forward, placing a trembling hand on Noah's arm. "Thank you," she whispered. Noah allowed himself a small smile, a rare release of the burden he had carried alone for so long. Later, as the storm outside eased, Richard stood at the balcony with Noah beside him. The city lights flickered like distant stars. Noah had made his choice. Trust had been given. Loyalty had been earned. And the world, chaotic, unpredictable, dangerous, felt a little safer tonight. Richard finally broke the silence. "Your family now. Not by name, not by blood, but by choice. And that choice is stronger than any threat that comes from outside." Noah glanced at Emily, sleeping peacefully, and then at Richard. For the first time since Lily, he felt something he hadn't in years: hope. The envelope, the stalker, the threats, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was the bond they had forged. What mattered was the courage that had brought a homeless boy into a billionaire's world and changed it forever. And somewhere, far beyond the estate, whispers of that night would ripple, marking the moment when trust, courage, and love proved stronger than fear. For Noah, Emily, and Richard, life had shifted irreversibly. And though the future held challenges, one truth was unshakable: some bonds are forged not by circumstance, but by choice, and that choice could shock the world.